You a shout when we're ready to record. Oh, we're already recording. Okay, doesn't matter. The listeners can listen to this bit. I just wanted to, before we carry on week 5, I just wanted to wish Elaine Jacobs a refuah shalema. I can see that she has joined us, which is wonderful that she's feeling well enough to join with us because she's been unwell in hospital. And I wanted to wish her a refuah shalema, and it's great that she has felt well enough to join in tonight's session. So we wish her well. Okay, so week 5, you've all done very well, and looking at the numbers, we seem to be about 10% down, which is not bad for halfway through the course. That means 90% of you have got some staying power and have put up with 4. Oh, we've got a bit more now, and we may even get up to our full complement yet. Who knows? So we are going to deal tonight with a subject which is probably more relevant now than at any other time in the last 30 years that I've been giving medical ethics lectures. Until this last 10 months or so, the subject of triage of resources has been rather an academic one. Certainly for most of us living in what I will loosely call the Western world, there has not been a time until this year where resources have been scarce and where there has been the potential for people to not have the medical resources that are required. Today, of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that has all changed. And the idea of rationing medical resources, whether that be ventilators or drugs or personnel or ICU beds or vaccines when they come out, please God. These are subjects now which people are having to give practical thought to instead of just pontificating about them like I've been doing for the last 30 years. Now it's chickens come home to roost time, and we now actually have to think about these things in some detail. So I did send out, oh no, that's not true at all. Avril sent out the course material for tonight. And I'm not going to go through it word for word. I had some very helpful feedback from some people. And I just want to say that we're going to do something slightly different tonight, in that one of the feedbacks we got was that you would like to know what I think about the case after you've been in your breakout room. So I will endeavor to do that towards the end. And the other piece of feedback I got is that not everybody likes to be in the breakout rooms. Some people are a little shy and don't want to do it. And that's absolutely fine. If you don't want to go into a breakout room, all that you need to do, or all that you need not to do, really is more accurate, is when we go into the breakout rooms, just don't click on join. And then you won't be joined. You will just then be, as it were, in the corridor, not in one of the rooms. So if you don't want to go into a breakout room, don't click on join. So I'm not going to go through every word of this handout that I sent you, but the concepts I do want to discuss with you. So when we have a situation whereby we have to make a decision as to who is going to get a resource which is scarce, it can't be random. It has to be, there has to be some kind of policy, there has to be some kind of theory that we apply, some protocol. You can't just walk into the department one day and make a decision on a triage of resources, as it were, on the hoof, without giving it some thought. And healthcare providers, healthcare systems have been giving this thought for many years and have come up with a number of different models, which, as I said earlier, nobody ever really thought they would have to put into practice in the Western world. It was really an academic exercise, or it was for those to be applied in the Nebuch parts of the world that we would send out aid and help to. But for us, now, of course not. We've got plenty of resources. We don't need to really think about this too hard for ourselves. Well, now we do. So now we have to think about, what are those policies? What are those theories that people have been talking about? And do any of them actually work? And out of all of the theories that there are out there, which ones do we think are ethically most acceptable? Which ones are practically most possible? And of course, finally, towards the end of the session, we will look at the halachic implications for this problem. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the triage models that people have discussed. And most of them really start off, the starting point of them is the concept of utilitarianism. So that's quite a difficult word to say, utilitarianism. And we came across this word in previous sessions. And what it means is that the end point should be the most benefit to the most people. That's what utilitarianism means. So in our critical care situation, it means the survival of the greatest number of people. So you'll say that, well, that seems fair enough. That's a reasonable starting point. What can possibly be wrong with a situation that leads to the outcome, which is that the most people survive? Well, there are various different problems that might arise, that might raise. And so, although it's on the face of it, it appears that anything that involves that utilitarianism approach will incorporate the concepts that we've become familiar with over the last few weeks of justice and fairness. So let's have a look and see if that's true. So if you think about our situation now with the COVID pandemic, we had a situation early on in the first wave where the world thought we were going to be absolutely overwhelmed and there would not be enough ICU beds, there would not be enough hospitals, there would not be enough ventilators. And so if you think about what happened very early on, was that everyone went crazy trying to stock up the quantity of these things that each country had. So, for example, in the UK, they started building these cardboard hospitals called Nightingale Hospitals, which were sort of pop-up hospitals, which were there to take the overflow of patients when the health service was overrun. There were various different new cheap and quickly prepared ventilators that were on the market and that governments started to stockpile so that there would be enough ventilators around. And of course, that is the best way of triaging resources, is actually not to have to triage the resource in the first place, is to make sure that you have enough of what you need. And that's what the governments should have been doing over the last 30 years. And if you listen to Bill Gates, There is a, I'm sure some of you have seen it, there's a video, a TED talk of Bill Gates from about 5 years ago, which basically predicts a pandemic and says the world is sleepwalking into disaster. And he gives all sorts of various suggestions on what we should be doing to prevent that disaster. And of course, nobody ever took any notice of him. But it's a fascinating TED talk, not just because of its content, but because we're looking at and listening to that TED talk in retrospect from the position of an actual pandemic. So I'd recommend that to you. If you go into Google and put in Bill Gates TED talk pandemic, you will find that video, and it's worth a look at. But given that we are in a situation, or we thought we were in a situation, we might still be in a situation where we need to allocate resources because they are scarce. And these resources may be intensive care unit beds, they may be clinical critical care clinicians, they may be testing or vaccines. Who's going to get these first? Now, what we have seen very clearly around the world is that there seems to be a disparity between various races, various ethnic groups, various socio-economic groups as to the effect of this pandemic on the members of those groups. So, for example, those who are in Black and Asian minority ethnic groups, so-called BAME, are disproportionately affected in terms of number, disproportionately affected in terms of severity, and disproportionately affected in terms of deaths. The same can be said for people in the lower socio-economic groups. And so there is clearly a disparity going on here. And what we have to understand is why that's happening and what can we do, or should we even do anything to address that disparity? Because one of the things that you find is that those groups of people are less good at accessing healthcare. So, for example, if you have to fill in loads of forms to access healthcare, then these people are less good at doing that. Many of us will be very familiar with that in terms of being in Israel. We feel a bit disadvantaged because we can't understand all the Hebrew forms that come along, and we have to get help with that. We have to ask our Israeli children or grandchildren to help us fill in a simple form, and we feel rather silly because if it was in our mother tongue, we'd be able to do it quite simply. Well, that's what has happened with many people trying to access healthcare, particularly in a pandemic situation. So the other thing that we have is that those groups who are doing least well in this pandemic are the groups who tend to have more comorbidities. By that I mean they have other illnesses. So we know from the figures that people who have pre-existing illness such as diabetes or heart disease, who are seriously overweight, they do less well than others. And those so-called disadvantaged groups often have a disproportionate number of people with comorbidities. And so that's something else that we need to take into account when we look at triaging our resources. Should we, and this is a question that society has to ask itself, should we try to make it a level playing field? So let's say crudely, very crudely, that there are 50% of the people dying from COVID are from a minority group which only make up 25% of the population. So that means that they are double the death rate of the rest of the population. Should society then say, okay, we now need to allocate double the resources to that group of people than we do to everybody else? so that we can bring down their death rate, or if you want to look at it a different way, bring up everybody else's death rate, so that they are more of a match, so that this disadvantaged group are no longer disadvantaged in their health care system. In other words, it's what you would call, in other words, positive discrimination. So the university's entrance people have been talking about this. Should there be a quota of ethnic minorities? Ethnic minorities only make up half the percentage that they are of the population in the top universities. So there is a theory that says we should make it twice as easy for ethnic minorities to enter these universities, to level up the playing field. So should we as a society, this is a question society must ask itself, should we as a society alter the triage of resources to benefit those more disadvantaged groups? That's one consideration that we have to have. Now, so if we have this utilitarian approach, which is seeking to maximize the number of lives saved by allocating the life-saving resources in a certain way, then how are we going to do that? How are we going to actually put that into practice? What kind of criteria are we going to use if we're going to take a utilitarian approach? So, are we going to give critical resources to those that are most likely to survive? In other words, not the ones who are most sick. It seems a bit counterintuitive. Surely you would give the most critical care to the ones who are most sick. It's a bit akin, this question is a bit akin to soldiers on the battlefield who a soldier is injured. Do you stop and try and save that soldier's life if you can see that it's a hopeless situation? Or do you move on to somebody who's less injured, but you've got a chance of saving? And that's a very difficult ethical question to answer. And this is the same ethical question that we have in our utilitarian approach. Do you give that resource to the one who is sickest, or do you give that resource to the one who you think you can save best? Who is, and again, what is the criteria of saving? There is a triage protocol called the Yale Triage Protocol, which uses a criterion of survival on discharge from hospital for 1 year. So if a person is not likely to survive for 1 year, then that's not considered survival. So that takes into account certain comorbidities. So if you have somebody who has COVID-19 illness, let's say, and requires a ventilator, but as a comorbidity, they have metastatic cancer, and their likelihood of surviving 1 year, even without COVID, is less than 50%, then the utilitarian argument would be, well, we're not going to, inverted commas, waste resources on this person because they're not going to survive for a year, and that doesn't count as survival. So you're going to move on to somebody else who would use the resource that you would have used for person A, and they will survive more than a year. Now, that is a utilitarian approach, but it poses all sorts of ethical problems, because what you're doing there is you are making a quality judgment on somebody's life. And that is a slippery slope. That's where the Nazis started. They said one life is worth more than another. Certain lives are considered subhuman, Untermenschen, and I don't need to remind anybody of that. Now, please don't think that I am equating the triage of resources in a pandemic with Nazi Germany. I am not. So before you all jump up and down and send me rude messages, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that on an ethical basis, it's a very difficult concept for us to get our heads around, to discuss patients' quality of life in those terms, because it leads us to places we don't want to go. I could tell you numerous stories of people that I've come across in my medical career who various doctors and nurses have written off as having no quality of life, and therefore not for active treatment, only for them to recover, not fully, but recover sufficient to have what most competent people would consider to be some kind of quality of life. And it's not a decision. Quality of life decision is not something that I signed up for when I became a doctor. I didn't sign up to decide who shall live and who shall die. And that is not just me speaking. That is something that I read. I can't remember where I read it now, but I read it recently in an article which a junior doctor who was working on a COVID ward had written, that was how they felt. And the words that they said, I think it was a young lady, said, I didn't sign up for this to be in God's shoes as to who shall live and who shall die. But that's what we're being asked to do if you take a quality of life approach. And that is part of the utilitarian approach, and that's why it has its difficulties. And that's why there are other protocols which have been suggested, because of course if there was one protocol that worked for everybody, we wouldn't need any others, would we? A bit like medications, that, you know, if there was one medication, one vaccine that worked for COVID 100%, we wouldn't need 5 or 6 or 7 of them. It's the same with explanations of psukim in the Torah. If there was one explanation that really fit, we wouldn't need 70 of them. The more there are, the less they fit. So the more theories that we have about how to deal with triage of resources is a description to us that actually none of them are perfect. And it's really, as we said before, it's the judgment of Solomon to try and decide these things. So if you take this utilitarian approach, and I've written this in the handout, and you can look it up. There is something called the Maryland Framework for the Allocation of Scarce Life-Sustaining Resources, which is the basis for most theories which are in practice today. And what that does is it speaks about deprioritizing, which is a fancy word. The fancier the word, the more people are trying to hide their emotions. That's my experience. Deprioritizing means passing over, and making them lesser priority means passing over. It's like when you say to somebody, my child has challenging behavior. You mean that he's badly behaved, only you're not allowed to say that anymore. It's challenging. So deprioritizing patients means passing them over for somebody else. And this system deprioritizes patients who are more acutely sick for the reasons that we've said. And there is a scale that is applied called SOFA, S-O-F-A, which stands for Sequential Organ Failure Assessment. And you get a score. Everything in medicine today is score-based. You get a score for how sick you are. And if you get too high a score, this is the counterintuitive bit. If you get too high a score on the SOFA scale, then you don't get critical care because you're too sick. I know that sounds a bit bonkers. How can you be too sick for critical care? But that's how it works. So we need to look at other possible situations other than the plain utilitarian system, because the plain utilitarian system of trying to maximizing lives saved is too blunt a tool, if you pardon the expression, because there are too many variables, there are too many difficulties, just some of the ones that we've mentioned already. So obviously we need to try and avert the need for this by making sure we've got loads of resources, But let's say we don't. If we don't have that and need outstrip supply, then there is another approach which is called FCFS. Now that's an acronym. The other thing that you get in medicine today, apart from scores for everything, is you get initials for everything. Right? There's FAST, you know, face, arm, speech, and time. The stroke thing, FAST. Well, there's FCFS, which stands for first come, first served. Nothing fancy about that. And this is one approach to medicine. It's almost anti-utilitarianist in a way, because what it says is whoever gets there first gets that resource. And that means that it doesn't mean if you're too sick and you've got too high a SOFA score that you don't get treated. Whoever gets there first, whoever is wheeled into the emergency room first gets the treatment first. And you don't go away from that patient's treatment until you've finished treating them. And then you treat the next one that comes in. The problem, of course, with that is that it does not address those whose need is greatest. The person who comes in first might not be the one whose needs are greatest. And therefore, you may end up having lives lost that could have been saved because you're on the first come, first served basis. Somebody comes in who's injured or ill and needs that resource. They put them on that resource. Let's say they go on the ventilator, you've only got one. What are you going to do? Take him off because somebody comes in who's sicker? And then the first person, well, yes, the answer is yes, if the first one can survive without. But that's another judgment that you're going to have to make. Who's sicker than who and who gets the resource. So first come, first served, on the face of it, you would think that that was a fairer system in terms of accessing healthcare. But actually, when you stop and think about it, that's not the case. Because who is it that can access healthcare first? It's those that know their way around the system. It's those that have got protexia. It's those that can ring up their mate, who's the consultant in the emergency room, and say, I'm sick, or my relative is sick and I'm coming in now and I want you to look after them because you're my mate. The person in the lower socioeconomic group, the person in the ethnic minority that doesn't have that kind of protexia is thereby disadvantaged. So whereas on the face of it, you would think that the first come, first served model would appear to address some of the problems of the utilitarian model. Actually, it can actually exacerbate it, because vulnerable populations are the least likely to be first in line for treatment. Think about the vaccine. Who are the people who are going to be first in line for the vaccine? The people who are savvy, the people, yeah, Hillary's got her hand up, she's going to be first in line. The people who are savvy, the people who know how to work the system, the people who've got Israeli children or grandchildren that can get on the phone, the people who are savvy with their computers.
Johnny, can I say something?
Who am I speaking to?
You're speaking to Elaine. I'm platzing here.
Yes, go on, Elaine.
Can I speak just for 5 seconds? I just wanted to say that a lot of what you've said doesn't apply in Israel. Apart from the disadvantage, you're talking about Sudanese refugees, totally agree with you, they have no healthcare cover. But everybody else who's born here, every baby has to be in a healthcare system from the moment they're born.
You're absolutely right, Elaine. That is true. But the question is, can they access it through in other words, how do they know how to do it? For example, I wasn't actually thinking necessarily about what we would call disadvantaged people in society here. I'm talking about people like me, right?
Oh, Johnny.
No, listen, hear me out. What I'm talking about is accessing healthcare. Now, I am a member of a kuppah where I have to book my appointments either on the phone or online. Now, as it so happens, my Hebrew isn't bad, so I can do it. But there's lots of people here that have got poor Hebrew and can't do it on the phone, and have got poor Hebrew skills on the computer and can't do it. That makes us disadvantaged in accessing healthcare. So
can I just tell you that I'm in Maccabi, so I only know what's with Maccabi. You're entitled now, if you think you've got corona or anything, to go to any centre and present yourself with your health card.
And how do you
don't
know
have
that,
to
Elaine?
be savvy. You don't have to know anybody. You just
how
go
do you
along.
know that? How do you know
How
that?
do I know that? I'm in hospital, aren't I?
Yes.
But
okay.
Seriously, because no, if you ring up Maccabi, I appreciate that if you're speaking English, but that it's more difficult. But if you ring up Maccabi to make an appointment, they tell you before you start with the appointment system that if you feel you have, please just go along. You don't even have to ring the *3555 number. You just go along and present yourself.
Right. So that is a very good example of how a group of people, Maccabi in your example, have tried to address exactly the problem that I'm discussing. Because you just mentioned the number there, *355, I think you said.
Right? 3555. That's
whatever
they don't even do it anymore.
Right.
Because
okay.
Yeah.
So why have they done that? They've done that because not everybody knows how to do *3555 or knows that you're meant to do *3555.
Well, not anymore.
What they have done is they have addressed exactly the problem that I'm raising here, which is that there are groups of society, in every society, even in Israel, where accessing the healthcare is more difficult than for other people. And so somebody's put on here, on the chat here, how many people haven't got computers or can't afford the bus fare, etc., etc. So what Elaine has said is very important to know that, because that is one step further on from where we are in this discussion. That is Maccabi doing its best to reduce and to remove that barrier from those disadvantaged people. We need to also think about the disadvantage, not just in what we would call so-called disadvantaged, these socio-economic groups, but also amongst people who have difficulty accessing healthcare. So first come, first serve has its advantages and disadvantages.
Johnny, use Maccabi, and it's all in Hebrew. So the first thing is they say COVID.
I'm going to mute everybody. We can have this discussion at the end because I need to get through the material. So another possible solution is what is known as the egalitarian triage. Now this is really, you would think, this would be really dealing with the disadvantage, because this is what we would call a lottery. Okay, so it's not first come, first served. It's entirely by lottery. So let's say that you have, let's take vaccines, a good example. Let's say in Netanya we've got, I don't know, let's say 100,000 residents, and we've only got 20,000 vaccine doses. How are we going to choose who gets those 20,000? Well, one suggestion is that we do it by egalitarian triage. That's a fancy name for it. But actually what it is a lottery. So with only 1 in 5 of us can have it. So everybody who's a citizen gets put in a big hat, and Miriam Feiberg comes along and pulls out 1 in every 5 names, and that's who gets the vaccine. Now that definitely helps to if you like, level the playing field, because nobody actually has to press any buttons or ring any numbers or do any of the things that some people might find difficult to do. You're in the lottery. You've got to be in it to win it. I think that used to be the motto in the lottery in the UK anyway. So you're in it anyway just by being a citizen. So that definitely reduces the disproportionate issue with various ethnicities, socioeconomic groups, and people who have difficulty accessing stuff like the elderly and what have you. But of course, if you do that, then what's going to happen is you are not going to maximize the lives saved, because what you're not doing is using the resource that you have to its best ability. So if you have only 1 in 5 people can be vaccinated, one approach would be to say, okay, well, we're going to have the most vulnerable, and we'll have to work out who that is, and that will be a system. By having a lottery, then you are not going to get to the most vulnerable. It's going to be random. That's the whole point of it. So again, it has some advantages. It has some theoretical advantages because we eliminate disadvantage, but it has disadvantages because we don't use a scarce resource to its best ability. So then we look at a further one, which is the exact opposite. The exact opposite of the egalitarian one, and that is what is known as a prioritarian triage. And that intentionally prioritizes the worst off. So that means allocating the scarce resources to the sickest patients first, to those minority groups which are affected most. So in our COVID situation, that would be the ethnic groups and those of lower socioeconomic status. So it would, in some ways, it would be an inverse, what do they call it? An inverse racism, an inverse disproportionality. So it prioritizes those who are sickest first. But again, the problem with that is that they don't necessarily allocate resources where maximum benefit could occur. So in other words, if you took a prioritarian approach, you would have to put a patient on a ventilator who was still alive, who was so sick that he only had a 2% chance of living. So whilst he's on that one ventilator, there are other people who could have had a much higher chance of living, who will not live, and he's going to die anyway because he's only got a 2% chance of living. So you're going to look and you're going to prioritize the sickest patients first, but you're not going to get the maximum benefit of your resource. So again, that doesn't seem to work. So somebody else then suggested a different way, and that is to consider the individual worth of the patient. Wow. Now we're getting into something which is like eugenics. This is really beginning to be uncomfortable. Who decides who is worth what? So, for example, importance to society. So let's say you have somebody who is a healthcare worker, somebody who is a fireman, somebody who is a frontline soldier, somebody who is putting their own life on the line for others. Surely they should have a higher priority for medical resources than somebody else who's not in that position. For instance, all of these people, doctors, healthcare workers, firemen, soldiers, policemen, etc., all of these people, if you save their life, they could go on and save lots of other lives. Firemen particularly, and maybe medical workers all fall into that category. So you could also say, what about importance to society? Let's not get into politics, but let's say the Prime Minister or the head of the Supreme Court, or the CEO of Bezek. I don't know, someone who gives jobs to thousands of people, who's an important person to the country. It could be that, he's the foreign minister and he's ambassador to the United Nations, whatever it is. Does that importance to society impact on our decision to allocate a scarce resource? Or is the person who is in that important position just as worthy of having the resource as somebody who is not of significant worth to society? That's another question. And finally, a system has been suggested which is called a fair innings. Now, I think that probably must only be intelligible to either English or American people who are familiar with the game of cricket or baseball, because those of you who are not familiar with cricket or baseball, what on earth is a fair innings? But those of you who are will know exactly what we mean by a fair innings. What it means is that you would give priority to the young people. So young people who've not yet had an opportunity to fulfill their full lifespan would get priority over somebody who was past their 70 years and 10, or whatever other cut-off point you decided was a person's fair innings. So it's an ageist approach, and this may well lead to an overall numerical utilitarian approach, because if you count the number of years of life saved as opposed to the number of actual lives saved, then this approach will probably win hands down, because it means that you treat the young people and the old people don't get treated. And this is sadly, in my view, this is what happened in the first wave of COVID in Europe. It happened throughout Europe. I don't know that it happened here in Israel, and I'm pretty sure, actually, in my reading around this subject, I'm pretty sure it did not occur in Israel, but it certainly did occur in Europe, and it certainly did occur in the UK, and it certainly did occur in Manchester, that I'm most familiar with. And that is that people over a certain age, when they were taken into hospital, were not given an ICU bed and were not given a ventilator. Not necessarily that they were all taken up at that time, but they were being held, they were being reserved for the huge wave of influx of cases that they were expecting at the beginning of the first wave. And those elderly people in Europe who were unfortunate enough to get sick in that very early part of the first wave. And by the way, I am not being critical here. I'm not making a judgment on those governments or on those systems, because it really was a tremendously difficult time for them, tremendously difficult decisions that had to be made, and I wouldn't have liked to have been making them. So please don't think I'm being critical, I'm being factual here. There were people who were not put on ventilators, not given ICU beds, not admitted to hospital because they were considered to be too old. Somebody just put on chat just now that in Spain, people were left out in the cold in old age homes, and that's an example there. So that idea of a fair innings has got its problems as well. So just to recap very briefly, we've got utilitarian's approach, which everything else really is based upon or stems from, which says, let's use our resources to its maximum benefit and save the maximum number of lives and do the maximum number of benefit. There will be casualties on the way. Some people will fall by the wayside, but at the end of the day, when we look at the figures, we will have saved more people than we could have done on any other system. That's what the utilitarian system says. First come, first served. The problems there is that it disadvantages those that can't access healthcare as easily as others. Egalitarian triage, which is like a lottery. That means you're going to be wasting resources because people who don't really need them are going to get it. Or then you're going to try prioritarian, which means you're going to prioritize the most sick, which means that lives are going to be lost because there will be resources not given to those who could be saved in favor of those who really, their chances of survival are very low. Or we're going to consider people's individual worth, whether this person is a person who is of great worth to society, and therefore that gives them priority. Or are we going to take an ageist approach and use the concept of a fair innings and give our resources to those who've not yet had a fair innings? Those are some of the systems which society with a capital S and societies with a small s, in other words, individual societies, individual countries, individual healthcare systems have had to grapple with. Some of the solutions that they've tried to make, like the one that Elaine mentioned earlier on with Maccabi, which is to try and make access to healthcare as simple as it possibly could be, to make it as available as possible to as many people as possible. That stems all those attempts by Maccabi and Clalit and all the other kupot that have all done their best to do this. This is all as a result of people sitting down, maybe not actually verbalizing this, but thinking about the problems that we are discussing tonight. And that is, how do we get resources to the people that need it the most? How do we get the best value out of our scarce triage, scarce medical resources? And these are the serious questions of the 21st century, which we are grappling with now. And all healthcare systems have had to grapple with that. It's very easy for us sitting in our homes and reading on Ynet or in the Jerusalem Post or in Ma'ariv or Yediot or wherever else you get your information from in Israel, or Sky News or CNN or wherever it is, to sit here and say, that's terrible. Why don't they do this? Why don't we do that? It's a damn difficult decision that these people are making. And the fact that we have, that I've just highlighted to you in the last 45 minutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different theories, none of which are anywhere near perfect, shows us how difficult this problem is, and how worthy the people who have to make these decisions must be. These kind of ethical decisions cannot be made on the hoof. They have to be made with a considered thought, and that's why every civilized society, every Western society, has an ethics committee, whatever it wants to be called. It has an ethics group of parliamentary people discussing these kind of things, preferably before they have to be made, and then policy decisions are made. But they're very, very difficult policy decisions to make, and they have to be made on an individual basis at times as well, which takes me to our case. I'm going to go through our case now, and then I'm going to break you into the rooms, and then we're going to come back and look at what the halacha says, and then we'll have a discussion together about the case. And for those of you who asked for it, I will tell you, for what it's worth, what my views are on the case. So let's have a look at the case. I think you have probably got it if you printed it out. Let me share the screen with you in case you haven't got it. There we go. So the case is this. This is what you're going to discuss. You are working in a small ICU, that stands for intensive care unit, with only one ventilator available. The unit is named the Edith Jones unit, after the mother of the lady who funded the equipment in the unit. A local disaster occurs and the emergency room is full of victims. Among the victims are the following people requiring mechanical ventilation. Number one is a young man of 29 years old, previously fit and well, worked as a junior doctor in this hospital. He has a wife and 3 young children. Number 2 is a 78-year-old unmarried lady with no children. She happens to have a medical history of metastatic lung cancer, but she also happens to be Sonia Jones, the daughter of Edith Jones, who funded the whole unit. Number 3, a 35-year-old pregnant woman, unemployed, single parent with 4 other children. She's a known alcoholic and drug abuser. And number 4, Lord Snooty, age 65, retired Prime Minister and now global ambassador for the country. He has a history of diabetes, smoking, and is obese. Who will you put on the ventilator? It's your decision. You have a group of 4 or 5 people on your ward. The 4 or 5 of you in your room have to make a decision. You have 15 minutes to make that decision before you have to come up with a name of who is going to go on that ventilator, and you have to justify your decision. So I am going to split you up now. We have 41 computers. I am going to break you out into, this time I'm going to break you out into 8 rooms, because I want to try and get at least some of you to talk about it afterwards. Reminder, those of you who don't want to join a room, then just don't click on join. The rest of you, click on join as soon as it comes up, and you will be allocated to your room. You should now have been invited to your room. Simon, if you can hear me, unmute yourself. Simon, can you hear me? Simon,
I can now, yes, and I've found the unmute button. I didn't have a join button, so,
right, so there must be some problem, because it happened last week with you, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it may be the portal that I'm using.
It may be. Let me see if I'm able to allocate you. If I can see how I could do that. Let me see. Is there an allocate button here? More. Let's have a look. Put in. No, I don't want to put you in the waiting room, do I? I don't want to
wherever you
want. No. Doesn't look like I can do that for some reason. So we'll have a room together. Is there anybody else who is not allocated? Elaine, are you there? Can you hear me, Elaine? And if you can, Elaine, unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm just going to have some drops in my eyes, so decided it wasn't the time.
Okay, jolly good. Well, stay where you are and you can listen to us. If you've got anything to add, then please do.
Okay.
So there's Simon, you've got me and you've got Elaine, and it looks like there are other people here as well who haven't joined. That may be deliberate, or it may be that they've also not got a join button. But anyway, tell me what you think, Simon. What are your thoughts about our 4 people?
I've ascribed a priority to those 4. I don't know whether it's a combined philosophy as such, but on the basis of the individual who is the sickest combined with the individual who by reason of going onto the machine will achieve the best quality of life after having had that facility. Now, I don't know whether that fits into any of the categories that you've suggested.
Let's think about it. So the sickest first, well, that definitely fits into one of the categories. That fits into the category that says you prioritize the sickest patients first. So that would fit into that theory. But it would then you're going to say, well, who will get the best outcome of life? Now, how are you going to judge that?
The best quality of life after taking into account, presumably, all the comorbidities.
Okay, so that's why the comorbidities are there, obviously. So you're going to then discount the lady with metastatic lung cancer, presumably, are you?
She came in at number 4 on my list.
Okay. And
top of my list was number 1, irrespective that he's a junior, irrespective of the fact that he's a junior doctor in the same hospital. That would be for me irrelevant.
So why is he number 1?
He's a young man previously fit and well, and it would appear, given his lack of comorbidities, that he would have the optimum chances of survival and quality of life following treatment.
Okay, what about number 2?
The 35-year-old pregnant lady, notwithstanding the fact that she's an alcoholic and drug abuser, plenty of drug abusers and alcoholics I come across go into their 60s. We're getting some very old hippies at them.
If you come across them, they're...
Yeah, sadly, we're getting some very old hippies who are passing away at the moment. So, who've had a lifetime of drug abuse.
I'm intrigued as to why she's 2 and he's 1.
Well, he has no comorbidities. And she has...
You just said yourself that being an alcoholic and a drug abuser makes not that much difference, really.
Well, it's a factor.
What about the fact that she's pregnant?
I suspect that there may be a Halacha issue there.
You may be saving 2 lives, Simon.
Yes, you're right.
So I'm going to nip into the other rooms, but I'm going to leave you to ponder that.
Please do.
As I nip into the other rooms and discuss it with others. But that's a point that perhaps you hadn't considered. That you're
right.
I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that there's a right answer to this. There isn't a right answer. What I wanted you to do, and you've done it beautifully, is to give some thought as to how you would do this and justify whatever decision that you've made. The thing about a discussion of a team is that I've come up with something that you actually hadn't thought of. And you might well come up with something that I hadn't thought of. And that's why these decisions must be made as teams.
Sure.
So I'm going to leave you while I nip into somebody else.
Just as a quick aside, there is today a Greater Manchester mass fatality exercise.
There you go. Well, absolutely. And so there should be. Right, let me go and have a chat with some other people.
Which one did he be?
Who is that?
I can't. I'm trying to mute myself now, and I can't. Oh, hold on.
Are you staying with us, Johnny, now, or are you watching another group? Can't hear you, you're muted.
I'm waiting for everybody to rejoin, so I'm here. How are you feeling, Elaine?
Oh, much better, thank God.
Good, good.
Yes, it's only been like the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, I can imagine. I can only imagine.
Unbelievable. No, it's quite interesting being hospitalized during Corona. It's fascinating. They're wonderful.
Well,
God bless the Jewish people.
Elaine, all the best anyway.
Oh, thanks.
Because Tina kept me appraised of your WhatsApp. So
yes. I'm doing okay.
Good,
Elaine,
excellent.
Elaine, it's Vivian here. I've been asking after you. I'm sending you my love.
I know. I heard from. Oh God, I'm afraid. I think it's affected my brain. I'm a bit tired. I'm lost asleep.
It was me. I sent it to you, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, everybody is back, except for one person. I don't know which one person that is not back yet. Maybe they've gone to make a cup of tea. Right, we're going to do it slightly differently this week in response to some feedback, and that is we're going to see what everybody thought about this before I go through the halachic side of things. So I'm going to choose 4 out of the 8 rooms for some chat. So randomly, who was in room 1 who would like to speak to me? Unmute yourself, and you don't know what room you were in. Okay. No. Okay. Right. Well, we'll just choose you randomly then. Right, Hilary, you're on. Hilary, what did your group think?
Well, the majority of us thought the doctor. It was between the doctor and the young woman. I said the doctor originally because he can go on to save many lives, working out that he's also got 3 children of his own. The woman, I think halachically, if I'm not mistaken, you're not obligated for the unborn child. It's the children that are alive that you have to be concerned with. So, I mean, she could have been newly made single, widowed, or what have you, but I still feel, me personally, I still feel the doctor and the majority of our group said the same.
Okay, so I understand that. What about the woman who paid for the thing?
I think she would have donated originally, not necessarily thinking that it was going to be for her family or what have you. She did it out of the goodness of her heart.
I'm sure she did, but does society not have a debt of gratitude to her?
No. Because of her age and because of underlying illness and what have
And
you.
what about Lord Snooty, the ex-Prime Minister,
Tough
who's now
luck.
global
Tough
ambassador?
Tough luck. It's a shame because he's an ambassador. He's done a good deed.
But he's abused himself.
But he's used.
He's abused himself.
Why?
Because he's
got the diabetes and everything else.
Smoking,
and he's not helping himself by smoking. To go on a ventilator is going to be, you know,
Okay,
it's a detrimental thing.
So what you have decided basically is you have decided that you have basically taken an approach that says what is the best benefit we can get out of this ventilator.
Yes.
And you have chosen the man. Okay, I suspect that many groups will probably agree with you. Did you consider the children of the man and the children of the woman?
Yes,
the man has a wife, and the wife could look after the kids. The woman has nobody. Those 4 kids will be orphans.
Thank you.
But the chances are that if she's an alcoholic and a drug abuser, the chances are that those children will end up in care at some point anyway. And
that's an interesting thought. Okay.
And yeah, that was it. So,
all right, that's really interesting. Who else would like to give me their views from their group? Speak up, or else I'll choose somebody. Okay.
I was in group 4.
Okay, Marlene, tell us what your group thought.
Well, we thought very much the same as Hilary. We also chose the young man because he was previously fit. The odds of him surviving were quite high, and he would be able to work in the future as a doctor and be of worth to the community and, you know, in the future. So our thoughts were very, very similar to Hilary's. We did go through them all. Again, we considered...
Who was bottom of your list? If you had 3 ventilators, who wouldn't get one?
The bottom was Lord Snooty, I'm afraid.
Why?
Well, I don't know about the others. We didn't consider it in that way.
All right. Okay.
We assumed there was only 1 ventilator.
Right. Okay. Well, there was, but Malcolm Gordon gave me a.
Didn't actually do that. I was concerned about the pregnant woman, but again, she had underlying problems, as Hilary said, and the odds of her surviving well or, you know, were lower. The elderly lady, we also didn't feel that because her mother had donated or funded the unit was a criterion for her to have the protection of getting the vaccine. You know.
Okay. Actually, it was her that donated the unit in her mother's name. She was the one that donated. Does that make a difference?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
All right, thank you. Let me ask Marcel. Marcel, let me know what you thought. Unmute yourself, Marcel.
I did. Okay. I think our group was in favor of the.
Hang on. We've got 2 Marcels. We've got 2 Marcels. That's really amazing that we've got 2 Marcels. Let's take both of you, but let's do you one at a time. Let's do Marcel Glaske first, please.
Okay, very quickly. I was first of all in favor of the pregnant woman, but after hearing the points of my colleagues in the room, I was then convinced that the number 1, the doctor, was the right one, and not number 3, the pregnant woman.
Okay, tell me your thought processes. Why you initially thought the lady and why you changed your mind.
Well, there was, as you say, there was 5 lives there, wasn't there? There was three living children, hers, and a baby on the way.
So the potential for looking after those 5 children plus her, that was what persuaded you in the first place. What changed your mind?
Well, the others in the room felt that the doctor could do more good for other people. So, I mean, I could see the point of the argument. So I decided I would go along with it.
Right. So their argument was not on the basis that he would make a better recovery, but that he would do more good in the future. Okay. Do you think that your colleagues in the room would have changed their mind if this doctor was the kind of doctor that only did cosmetic surgery for Hollywood movie stars?
Very good point. It wasn't considered, but it's a very good point.
Do you think that might have persuaded them? That's an interesting thought. So these are just an example of the kind of things we need to take into account. Right. Thank you, Marcel. Let's go to the other Marcel. Marcel Lowenberg, please.
Our group, we voted right from the beginning to see what everyone's initial point was, and everyone voted for the young man, the doctor. There was a discussion about the 35-year-old pregnant woman. At the end, I think everyone stayed with the doctor.
Can you tell me what the thought processes were around that? Why you went with the doctor?
Because of the the Lord and the 78-year-olds were not really considered. Only the pregnant woman, because there were children there that could be without a mother. But eventually we weren't sure, because she was an alcoholic and drug abuser, that her future was there, and so we went for the doctor.
Okay, so it's very interesting. Thank you for that. Is there anybody else that would like to say anything different to what we've already heard? If so, unmute yourself and speak up. Charlie.
Hi, we went with the doctor as well, but we did mention the fact on the first come, first served, he's the first one in. And I don't think anybody else has mentioned that. Apart from that, he ticked more boxes on all the categories that you mentioned. But certainly, I seem to remember something about first come, first served in Halacha.
Charlie wouldn't allow us, sorry to interrupt, Charlie wouldn't allow us to put first come, first served.
They all arrived at the same time, Charlie. They all arrived at the same time.
And that's impossible.
Okay, well, it's a miracle. They all arrived at the same time. I'm beginning to, Dov, I'll come to you in one sec, Dov Lister, 1 second. I'm beginning to wonder whether I made a bit of a mistake now with this case, and maybe I should have made the doctor married but no children. And I'm wondering whether that would have made the pregnant lady go further up in the pecking order. Avril Links is nodding. Hillary is shaking her head. So you can see how difficult this problem is. And that's exactly
has potential to have children.
I also said, what if the doctor was going to be was Harold Shipman?
Well, yes, yeah, there are doctors and there are doctors. That's true.
Right.
So it's interesting to see how all of your mindsets have shown this, and I'm wondering whether it would have made a difference to decisions if the doctor had not had children. I'm going to ask Dov Lister, and then I'm going to go to Phyllis, who's also got her hand up, in that order. Dov.
Just very briefly, we discussed the case. We also went in the end for the doctor, but there's some information that's missing, which is how seriously these people are injured. These are not COVID cases, it's a local accident. If he was very seriously injured, then on the basis of SOFA, he may not have fulfilled the criteria. It's all very well to say he has a wife and 3 kids and may do good in the end, but if he's going to be a vegetable by putting on the ventilator, that's a different score.
Okay, that's a very, very important point. That information wasn't given to you, deliberately kept vague so that we didn't bring in too many different variables, because it would be a bit even more tricky than it already is. But that's certainly something which is needed to be highlighted. We're assuming here that they are all in equal SOFA score.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point that you raised there. Okay, Phyllis and then Jackie, please. Phyllis first.
Yeah, Okay, yeah, we were stuck between 1 and 3, and very hard for us to make a decision. But we did think about the utilitarian point of view that it looked like, without us being medical people, that he had the best chance to make the most of this treatment. That it was because he was fit. He was previously fit and previously well, and that probably in a short time he could get off this machine. So that felt that was an added.
Are you saying that the fact that he
would benefit, that he might benefit the most?
Right. So what you're saying is the fact that he was fit and well was the main criteria, rather than the fact that he was the doctor and that he had children.
Johnny, I don't know that it was the main criteria, because we looked at that with we looked at that with the pregnant. Our order was the same as everyone else. It was between 1 and 3, the pregnant mother. Both of them, we were motivated by their children. The doctor, that he could contribute to society, was okay, but I think the fact that he had a wife and children was more important. The woman who would leave 3 children and an unborn baby, that was all very important to us. But the other thing is who would be able to use this machine and get on it and off it quickly. That too seemed important.
Right. Okay. Very
or
interesting.
At least we mentioned it. I don't know that we were sure about anything, but I think that was an issue that we discussed.
The idea, Phyllis, was that you shouldn't be sure of anything. That's good. Right, Jackie, we'll just take Jackie, and then we're going to go through some halacha. Yes, Jackie.
Right. Okay. Well, we chose the doctor over the 35-year-old pregnant woman, again, because we felt that he would recover the most, and he had the most to contribute in helping other people once recovered. Although they both had children, because she was a drug addict, she was a drug abuser and an alcoholic, it doesn't say, and she had 4 children, but what it doesn't say is whether or not those 4 children were already in care, and also the fact she was pregnant, whether or not that 5th child would likely be taken into care.
Okay.
So,
another piece of information that was missing from the jigsaw. Okay, right. I think that's been really interesting, and I think it's demonstrated how difficult it is to make decisions in these things. I'm going to go through with you now in the remaining time the halacha and how the halacha looks at these cases. And let's see, as we have done in previous weeks, where there are parallels with Western societal thought and where there are conflicts. And let's have a look at this. So I'm going to share.
Can I just ask before you start that? I did bring up in our group the fact that it does say kibbud of aim, and that age elderly people in Jewish law are so revered, and there is a lot of halacha on how you treat older people in society. So I just, that was actually brought up in our.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Yeah, that is correct. So we'll bear that in mind.
Johnny?
Yes, Johnny.
I'm a bit confused now. Are we doing on halacha or compassionate? What? No, hang on a minute. Is there one against the? Is there one for?
Well, we'll see. That's what we're going to see now. What I'm going to take you through now is the halacha, and you're going to see that there will be some parallels and there will be some conflicts with what Western society thinks. And then after that, we will, if there's time, and those that wish to discuss it, may or may not change their opinions as to what went on. So let me share the screen with you. And I'm hoping that you can see that screen. Let me know if you can, please.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Jolly good. Right. So the division of scarce resources and triage in Halacha. The first source I want to show you is a pasuk in Vayikra, chapter 25, which says, if your brother becomes destitute and his hand falters beside you, you shall support him, whether he is a convert or a resident, so that he can live with you. That's the important part. And then we have the next verse, says it again. Do not take interest from him. You shall fear your God and let your brother live with you. That's talking about interest in monetary terms. So you're going to say to me, what's that got to do with anything? Well, just bear in mind those words, can live with you, that your brother will live with you, because that is what the Gemara picks up on in the Gemara in Bava Metzia. It's a very, very famous Gemara. Many of you will have know, even if you don't know where it comes from, you will have heard this story. The Gemara discusses this pasuk. What does it mean? And your brother shall live with you. So the Gemara asks here, here's the English, there's the Hebrew if you want to see it there. And it says, the Gemara says, what do you mean your brother shall live with you? And he says, he gives an example. This is a very, very famous example that the Gemara gives. If two people were walking on a desolate path in a desert, and there was one jug of water which was owned by one of them, and the situation was such that if both drink from the jug, both will die because there's not enough water. But if only one of them drinks, he will reach a settled area and live, and the other one will die. So there is a dispute as to what the halacha is. Ben Petora says they should both drink and both die, because neither one of them should see the death of the other, meaning that by drinking all of the water, he will be causing the other one to die. And that was the opinion until Rabbi Akiva came along and said, our pasuk, your brother shall live with you. And Rabbi Akiva said, that means that your life takes precedence over the life of the other person. So what Rabbi Akiva is saying is the person who owns the jug of water. Now here we've got a different question, and we'll come to the question where it's a shared resource in a minute. Here, this is not a shared resource. This water has been purchased by person A. It belongs to person A. According to Rabbi Akiva, person A should drink all the water and should survive, and person B should get none of the water and should not survive. That's the first case. Okay, that's the case in the Gemara Bava Metzia. There is then another Mishnah in a different, completely different place in Horiot, another famous Mishnah, which says a man supersedes a woman to keep alive and to return a lost object. A woman supersedes a man to clothe and to free from captivity. And if they both stand to be disgraced, that's a euphemism for raped, they're both going to be raped, the man supersedes the woman. Okay? Oh, Barbara's not happy with that. Okay.
Johnny, is that why the man didn't send out his servant to be raped in Mika and the in Pilegesh Begiva? Well, may well be. This is a Mishnah in Horiot. We're not finished though yet. Now the Mishnah goes on, and it says here's a hierarchy in the Mishnah of who supersedes who. A Kohen supersedes a Levi, as you'd expect. A Levi supersedes a Yisrael. A Yisrael supersedes a Mamzer. Product of a forbidden relation is a Mamzer. A Mamzer supersedes a Natin, which is a member of a caste of the temple servants who were
historically descended from the Gibeonites. Givon was a place which Yehoshua made a pact with. He was duped by the Gibeonites into thinking that they'd come from a very long way away, when in fact they were only round a corner, and he made a Brit Shalom with them, and they became servants in the temple, but they were not proper converts. A Natin supersedes a convert supersedes a freed slave. And when is that? Says the Mishnah, when they are all equal. Now what that means is up to a debate. But if the Mamzer is a Talmid Chacham and the Kohen Gadol is an Am Haaretz, then the Mamzer takes precedence over the Kohen Gadol. It's a very famous Mishnah, Mamzer Talmid Chacham Kodem LeKohen Gadol Am Haaretz. So this Mishnah gives you a whole hierarchy. So let's say Lord Snooty was a Kohen, then what are you going to do? According to this Mishnah, the Kohen takes precedence. So what happens if the 35-year-old pregnant lady was a Talmid Chacham or a Talmidah Chachama? Then it would seem that she would get precedence according to this Mishnah. Or do we say, according to Rabbi Akiva, that Sonia Jones, who paid for the thing, who paid for the ventilator, and therefore it in effect belongs to her because she paid for it, does she take precedence? Now you can see, now that I've shown you these sources in the Mishnah and the Gemara, you can see why I chose the cases that I did. Those were not real life cases, obviously. I made them up, but I made them up deliberately to show you, to highlight the interesting things that you find in the sources. Now, we cannot paskin halacha from the Mishnah or from the Gemara. We know that. That is the starting point. And if I was to stop the session here now, you would have a view of the halacha which might not be quite accurate, because the halacha is based on the Gemara and the Mishnah that we've quoted, but we have to refine it. So there is a gentleman called Rabbi Dr. Moshe Sokol, who is the Dean of Lander College in New York, which is a modern Orthodox type of institution. He is a big Talmid Chacham, Rabbi Dr. Moshe Sokol, who writes extensively on these issues. And he says that we can't bring the traveler's case with the water as any kind of proof for what society should be doing with their resources, because that case is clearly dealing with a divisible resource. And the case in Horiot, it's not divisible, it's one or the other. So it would make no difference to the yichus or the chachma or anything of the traveler, because it's only when dealing with indivisible resources do we consider the yichus of those in question. So when resources are divisible, and when resources are owned by an individual, the halacha is that if you own the resource, then you get first dibs. Now, I'm not suggesting that Sonia Jones does own this ventilator because she donated it to the hospital. But if the scenario was, as you often find actually with Sifrei Torah, you'll find that many of the Sifrei Torah in the Aron Kodesh of your shul doesn't actually belong to the shul. It belongs to the person who donated it, but they lend it on a long-term loan to the Beit Knesset. We have that in our shul, and every now and again one of them goes missing because the person who owns it takes it off for a family simcha somewhere. So let's say this Sonia Jones person actually bought the ventilator and loaned it to the hospital and owned it herself. According to Rabbi Akiva, the halacha would be that she would be top of the list. She who was probably number 4 on most of your lists in that scenario would be top of the list. But that would only be when she owned the resource. Now, let's have a look what some of the other poskim over the generations have said. The Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Berlin, you can see there, he lived in the 19th century. He speaks very much on the utilitarian aspect, and he speaks about the concept of chaye sha'ah or chaye olam. You all know what chaye means, life. Sha'ah is an hour, short period of time, or chaye olam, permanent. In other words, who is going to make the best recovery? So, according to the Netziv, the person who has metastatic cancer, followed by the person who has diabetes, is obese and is a smoker, statistically, they are not going to live as long as the other 2 younger people who don't have those comorbidities. So in modern terms, the Netziv takes into account and makes very takes into very great account comorbidities. Who is going to get the most value from the resource? And he describes that as chaye sha'ah versus chaye olam. And then we come a little bit later, the next Gadol Hador. Some of you may have heard of this man, Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grodzinski. I don't think he owned a bakery in Golders Green. He was the Rosh Hashiva, a very famous Rosh Hashiva. It probably was his family that owned Grodzinski's bakery, I don't know. But anyway, Reb Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, very famous Rosh Hashiva, he speaks about this Inyan, and he asks the question about ownership of the resource as well. Is it a single party ownership? In other words, he takes on the opinion over here of Rabbi Akiva, that your life takes precedence because it belongs to you. But he makes a big distinction between that and third-party ownership, which is what we're talking about here. The resources in our question and in our societies, those resources are owned by society, by hospitals, which are owned by everybody. So it's a third-party ownership. So it's owned either by nobody or it's owned by everybody, whichever way you want to look at it. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, going back in time now, he says, and he talks about this yichus, and he basically dismisses the entire Mishnah in Horiot, which gives us the list of precedents called yichus, who gets first. And he says that yichus is not enough in order to cause the determent of others. In other words, actually, I think that's a misprint. I think it should be detriment, actually. I think that's a typo. I only just noticed that, and these notes are very old. Okay, anyway, so what Rabbi Yaakov Emden says is that list of who supersedes who is not sufficient. He says this is really a theoretical thing. When are they all equal? They're never all equal. That's what he says. They're never all equal. There is always something about them that is different. And what he quotes is the halachot of the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the rebellious son. You'll know that in Parshat Kitzei, there is a halacha that if you have a rebellious son who is a glutton, and he is brought before the Bet Din and is put to death. And it never happened. According to the Gemara, it never happened. And the reason it never happened is because the Pasuk says that he has to listen. He doesn't listen to the voice of his mother and the voice of his father. And the Gemara says that in order for him to fulfill the category of Ben Soreh or Moreh, the rebellious son, the mother and the father have to speak with the same voice. Now, the Gemara says that means metaphorically they have to speak with the same voice. In other words, they're giving in the same message, but they also have to have the same voice physically. And of course, that can never happen. You can't have two people who've got exactly the same voice, certainly not a man and a woman. And so that never happened. So what Rabbi Yaakov Emden says is that this Mishnah was not talking about something of practical value. It's talking about a theoretical situation. And yichus is not enough to cause the detriment of other people. Now, the Gemara in Horiot, when it discusses our Mishnah, speaks about a very interesting thing. And it's something which we mentioned earlier on. And that is societal need and the importance to society. Now, this is maybe where Lord Snooty might get a few points because, you know, he's an ambassador for the country. So the Gemara in Horiot brings down an amazing question. And it says that extends the list from the Mishnah. It goes further. And it says you've got two Kohanim. Remember, we said a Kohen takes precedence. You've got two Kohanim. You have one Kohen who is called the Mashuach Milchama. He was the man whose only job was to go out and lead the people in war. That was his job. He was Mashuach, not Mashiach, Mashuach. It's the same root of the word. He was anointed. That was his job. He was the Mashuach Milchama, means war. His job was to lead the people out to battle and to give them encouragement. And he was their battle general. And there was another Kohen called the Sgan Kohen Gadol. He was the deputy Kohen Gadol. And his job was on Erev Yom Kippur to be ready to step in at the last minute should something untoward happen to the Kohen Gadol. And the Kohen Gadol wasn't able to do the service on Yom Kippur. So either he developed some kind of illness or he developed some kind of impurity which disqualified him from service on Yom Kippur. You can't have no Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So they prepared a deputy who had to keep himself ready at the, a bit like an understudy on the West End, Lavdil. You know, you're on, or in Broadway. You got somebody who's there ready to step into the wings should it be necessary. And what the Gemara says is the Mashuach Milchama, who's a regular Kohen, he's not a Kohen Gadol, he's not even a deputy Kohen Gadol, he takes precedence over this guy, the deputy Kohen Gadol. Why? Because Rashi says, because the nation needs him. The nation needs the Mashuach Milchama. They need the military leader more than they need the deputy Kohen Gadol. So he takes precedence. So that shows us that when we're considering who gets what, according to this Gemara at least, the importance to society, what they can do for society. So we've got our doctor who could save lots of lives. We've got Lord Snooty, who's an ambassador for the country, could make a big difference to our lives. They would perhaps score more highly than the other two people in our list based on this Gemara. Howard, I'll come to you in a minute. I just want to finish off these last few halachot and then I'll come to you. Rabbi Yaakov Emden speaks about the performance of mitzvot. And he says that we said before earlier on that a Talmid, Mamzer Talmid Chacham Kodem Kohen Gadol Am Haaretz. So what about observance of mitzvot? Well, that's very difficult, isn't it? Because how are you going to work on that? Which mitzvot are more important than others? And is it a numbers game? I've kept 612 mitzvot, but the one that I didn't keep was a biggie, you know, idol worship. I didn't keep that one, but I kept all 612 of the other ones. Or I only kept the biggies, but you know, I didn't use a keli shlishi on Shabbos for my tea. Does that disqualify me from the ventilator? So there's that consideration. And then we've got that he brings in another suggestion that maybe if somebody who can produce children, then he should take precedence over somebody who can't produce children, because that will perpetuate the nation. And what about a person without any arms? Well, he can't put tefillin on, can he? So maybe he's disqualified because he hasn't got any arms. So that's impossible. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden raises this issue basically to dismiss it. And then we come almost finally to number 10, the degree of need. So the Mishnah also speaks about, if you remember, our Mishnah said that a man takes precedence over a woman in certain places, but a woman takes precedence over a man to free from captivity. The reason being that her need is greater than the man, because it's very likely that if a woman is in captivity, she will get raped. Whereas if a man is in captivity, he may get raped, but he may not. It's more likely that the woman will get raped if she's in captivity. So the woman takes precedence. And from that, the rabbis learn that we do take into account the degree of need, because the Mishnah shows us that the degree of need for the woman in that situation is greater. Then they come along and say, well, that's proven, because if they're both going to get raped, then the man takes precedence, because it's more of a disgrace for a man to be raped than a woman to be raped. We're not going to go into that and the merits and demerits of that argument here, but on the basis that we accept that as a given for this particular discussion, you can see that degree of need is something which is taken into account in Halacha. And finally, the Halacha, oh, it's not finally, we've got a few more yet, the relation. So here we go. Who gets it first? Well, we learn, and this is another famous Gemara in Bava Metzia, Aniye ircha kodmin, right at the end there. If you're giving out tzedakah, if you've got money to give out, the poor of your community takes precedence of the next door community. So in other words, we would say in English, charity begins at home. So if you own a resource, you are entitled, and in fact the halacha would say that you probably must give that resource to your relative, to your townsfolk before somebody else. And then, of course, we talk about this idea of utilitarianism. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, remember from the 17th century, he says a young man before a healthy old man before a sick one, a sick man before a castrated male, that's what we were talking about before, etc. Here, this is utilitarian argument, the ability to maximize life, and I suppose you could add on maximize benefit. Yes, finally, and I left this to the end deliberately, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the preeminent halachist of the 20th century in America, whose son, Rabbi David Feinstein, passed away last week. He was also a great halachist in his father's footsteps. He says, and this is probably the way we would paskin today, all the methods and schemes that may be discussed in regard to the Mishnah and in anything else only applies in situations where both patients will enter into the physician's care simultaneously. Only in cases such as these would the physician be in a situation where he has to choose which of the lies demands his attention. As soon as a patient enters a doctor's care, he is entitled to that care until it is delivered. So according to Rabbi Feinstein, he would take the first come, first served approach, meaning that it is possible that you could lose lives as a result of that, because you have to treat the one that comes in first. Now, interestingly, and this is very, very unusual, those of you who are used to looking at tshuvot from great rabbis will know that they always give a backup to their opinion by quoting sources, either previous poskim or better still, the Gemara or Mishnah or a pasuk in the Torah. Reb Moshe Feinstein gives no source whatsoever for this opinion, but because he said it, many other contemporary poskim quote him, and therefore it has become the preeminent position in, I would say, 20th century. I'm not so sure about 21st century, to be honest, but certainly when I first started giving this talk back in the 1990s, it was certainly the case that the majority of contemporary poskim would quote Reb Moshe Feinstein, and the first come, first served approach was the first and overriding situation that was put on board. If you had a situation like I gave you, this miraculous situation where they all walked in at the were all wheeled in at exactly the same time, then you have to start looking at all the other issues. So the halacha is very much parallel to Western thought. Why should we be surprised? Western thought is based on the Judeo-Christian value, which is based on our Torah. So we shouldn't be surprised. But actually, the halacha over the centuries has brought forward many of the concepts that we discussed before we went into the breakout rooms. So all those concepts that we talked about, which people have, in inverted commas, worked out for themselves, were actually all there within halacha for them to see if only they looked beforehand. And what's interesting to me is that there is so much in the way of parallel between what the halacha has said over the centuries and as to what modern ethics speaks about. And the bottom line is that it's a very, very difficult situation to decide who gets what in triage of resources. And the best way of dealing with this is, of course, to stockpile your resources so you don't ever have to make those decisions. And that is the responsibility of responsible government and societies. I'm going to go to comments now. I'm going to start with Howard.
Well, I just wanted to say this. I finally see why Sonia Jones should be given some consideration, because it's a matter of pour encourager les autres. If you give all that money for some equipment and then you don't get the use of it, it's going to discourage other people who will say, look, Sonia Jones made a donation of equipment. She couldn't even get to use it. She dies and somebody else gets it. I shan't bother. I'm not going to give any money because it's not going to do me any good.
I'll buy my own ventilator and keep it for myself.
Exactly. So
okay, that's an interesting comment. That is an interesting concept. I hadn't considered that, but there you go. That's very, very interesting. Any other comments or questions?
That's not the reason for giving. That's not the reason for donating equipment to a hospital only on the assumption that you would personally will use it. Once you've donated it, it's for everybody's use. And
you're right. You're right. That's true. That's true. But Howard is talking about an after the event situation. She's given this thing. She doesn't get to use it. Others will see that and say, well, you know what? I'm not going to donate it. I'll keep it for myself in case I need it. So it's an interesting thought. You're right. Of course, she didn't give that. She gave it altruistically. And I don't think Howard was saying that necessarily she should have it, but I think what Howard was saying, if I understand him, is that it's a consideration that we need to add into the mix, that others might be put off donating by that situation. By the way, the Israeli system for kidney transplants is such that if you donate a kidney to somebody, you then go to the top of the list for having a kidney given to you should you need one in future life. It is not entirely without precedent what Howard is saying. I'm not suggesting that people give kidneys away so that if they get kidney failure, they'll get to the top of the list. But what Israeli society, and I think in some other places as well, but I know it's definitely the case here in Israel, they're saying is that this is an encouragement for people to be altruistic, if you like. And that sounds like an oxymoron, really, because if you're altruistic, you're not going to get any of your own, not doing it for your own benefit. But you know what I mean. This is an encouragement for people to donate their kidney by saying that you yourself will get priority having donated a kidney. It's not quite the same thing by saying you'll get priority on the ventilator if you donate a ventilator. It's not quite the same thing, but there's a nuance there. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning that because I think that nearly every group that I spoke to, if not all of them, had poor old Sonia down the bottom of the list, third or fourth, and perhaps we need to just give her a little bit more consideration than she had. So yeah, thank you for that intervention there, Howard and Marlene. That's very interesting. Anybody else got anything to add to that or anything else?
Johnny, can I just
Hilary.
ask you, what is the situation with an unborn child? Are you not obligated, or are you obligated?
Okay, the life of a person who has already been born takes precedence over the life of an unborn child.
That's
so
what I thought. Okay.
In a God forbid situation where a pregnant woman has a condition which means that if they continue with the pregnancy, she is likely to die and the baby is likely to survive. The halacha is that the baby should be, inverted commas, sacrificed for her life. Her life takes precedence over the unborn child, which is different to the Catholic view, which is that terminating a pregnancy is forbidden in all circumstances, even if it means endangering the life of the mother. That is where there is a very significant divergence between the Catholic view and the Jewish view. The halacha is that the life of a person who has already been born takes precedence over somebody who has not yet been born. Now, in our situation, we've got a woman who is pregnant, and we could possibly save 2 lives. So that it needs to be considered in the equation as well. So, so yeah, that's the answer to your question in the halacha. Any other comments?
Johnny?
Yes.
I'm not sure I've got this. Are you saying there's no definitive answer? Forget halakhic, but in just Western terms, so to speak.
There is no definitive answer because, as you have all demonstrated very ably, there are arguments to put forward for everybody's case. And the arguments have to be weighed up. The idea of giving you this case was not to test you to see whether you got the answer right and you get 10 out of 10. The reason I gave you this case was to demonstrate to you the difficulty that people have in making these decisions, because it isn't clear cut. If it was clear cut and there was a simple answer, then you clever folk here would work it out. But you can't work it out, can you? Because there isn't a correct answer. There's only an answer which you are more comfortable with, or probably better put, least uncomfortable with, because it's not a decision we want to have to make. But in a situation where we have to make a decision, these are the factors that you have to take into account. What interests me is that Marcel Glaske came up with a reasoned argument, and he heard other arguments and was persuaded to change his mind. And that shows that a person is able to consider somebody else's view. And this is what studying anything is all about. It's about being able to see things from more than one perspective. Because a person who can only see their own perspective and is unable or unwilling to view a matter, whatever that matter is, from another person's perspective is bound eventually to make wrong decisions, because you will never make the right decision every time. It's very important, and these ethical issues, whether they're medical ethical issues or non-medical ethical issues, these demonstrate to us the importance of weighing up conflicting factors. That's what ethics are. If I was to say what's ethics, you would say to me it's a county in southern England. But no, ethics is when you are presented with conflicting ideas, and you have to make a decision on those conflicting ideas. The point about studying ethics is to be able to consider the varying different factors, to weigh them up, and to give each of those factors its appropriate consideration and its appropriate gravity. Now, if you are not able to look at and listen to somebody else's opinion, consider it, and be a person who can then say, you know what, you've got a point, I hadn't considered that. On reflection, I think you're right. If you can't do that, then that's a big problem. If you look at the makeup of committees of ethics, I think one of you, I think it was Charlie, said that every hospital will have its ethics committee. If you have a look at the people who are on that ethics committee, they will all be people, not necessarily who are great ethicists or moralists, but they will all be people who are top of their field in whatever their field is. And the reason that they're top of the field is that they are able to weigh up evidence. I think I mentioned this to you, if maybe not in this forum, maybe in a different forum, that when I was at university, they were just beginning with a new discipline called critical reading. And this was to teach us how to read scientific papers, in my particular case, and to critically appraise them, to pick them apart and see where the fault lines were, so that we weren't bamboozled by papers. And at the time, I didn't really take much notice of this course because we didn't have an exam on it. So to a rather immature, babyish medical student, I was only interested in what I was going to get examined on. And so I didn't really give it much thought. But actually, looking back, had I given it more thought, it would have been probably the most useful thing I could have studied, because what it enabled me to do, and I had to do it in later life, was to critically appraise arguments. So all these people on the ethics committees are people who are top of their fields because they can appraise information. They can look at it from various different angles. They're willing to listen to other people's opinions and are willing to have their own opinion changed if the evidence is there. So this particular week's subject of triage of resources, I think more than anything so far has demonstrated the difficulties that ethics presents in the provision of healthcare, and possibly out of all the topics we're going to tackle, this is perhaps my favorite because of what Johnny just said, that actually there is no right answer at all. There is only opinion, and that opinion has to be informed opinion based on weighing up evidence, of knowing the Halacha, knowing Western societal thought, and making grown-up, mature, joint decisions from all of you. So if there are no other comments, I'll draw it to a close and see you all next week. Any last comments before we go?
I thought we were going to hear what your opinion is.
I just gave you my opinion, Naomi. There is, okay, it's not fair. That's not fair. It's not fair. I have to do that. Okay, in my group of two, because I had a group of two because somebody couldn't get into a room and I couldn't work it out how to get him in there. In my group of two, the other person plumped for the doctor. So I, being a bit of a daftgenic, decided to put up a fight for the lady, the pregnant lady. on the basis, Marcel's smiling there because that's what he thought originally, on the basis that that saving the pregnant lady's life was assuming that we saved her and she did well, is going to enable those 4 children to at least have one parent, and we can potentially save the pregnant lady and her child. The fact that she was a drug abuser and an alcoholic did weigh in on my opinion, but on balance, I decided that she should not be penalized for those things because we don't know that necessarily means that she's going to be a lousy parent, and even a lousy parent is better than no parent at all, which is what these poor children would be left with. So my opinion, and it's only my opinion, and it's based on that thinking that I've just told you, my opinion would be if I had to make that terrible choice, I would choose the pregnant lady first. So there you are, Naomi. I promised you that I would tell you what it was, and there is my opinion for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Okay, any comments before we go?
Michael, give your opinion.
Okay, in that case, I'll bid you all a good night, and hopefully see you all next week.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, thank you. Very good.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Good night.